The crowd's cheers died in their throats. The head judge looked down at the young chef's signing hands, then back at her perfectly plated dish. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with mockery for the entire village to hear. Cooking is about taste, not charity. He didn't know the deaf girl he'd just humiliated was the daughter he abandoned 20 years ago. And she had entered this contest for one reason only: to destroy him. Her name is Amina, a trained chef, celebrated in the city for her skill, now competing in her mother's village festival. But she isn't here for the trophy or the glory, she is here for him. The question isn't whether she can win, it's whether the man who destroyed her family will even recognize the daughter he threw away 20 years ago. A young chef named Kofi left his pregnant girlfriend in this same village, chasing fame in the city. He found it, becoming the celebrated king of fusion and the star judge of the annual Oko Festival cook-off. He never looked back. The girl he left, Adana, raised their daughter alone, teaching her to cook in silence, to listen with her hands, and to remember the man who chose a career over his own child. Amina's world was one of vibration and sight. She felt the rhythm of a knife on a board, saw the exact moment oil shimmered, understood recipes as colors and textures. Her mother, Adana, a cook at a city hotel, used every tip to send her to the best culinary school for the deaf. Amina didn't just learn to adapt, she learned to excel. By 25, she was running the kitchen at the Spice Garden, a restaurant praised for its innovative dishes. But every success was shadowed by a single burning question: why was she not enough for him? The Okofe Festival is the biggest event of the year. For 3 days, the village swells with thousands, drummers, dancers, and the fierce competition for the Golden Mortar, a trophy that guarantees sponsorships and fame. The head judge for the past decade has been Chef Kofi Mensah. His word is law, his criticism is legendary. Contestants tremble. To win his approval is to have your career made. To earn his scorn is to be humiliated before your entire region. Amina watched him on television every year. She saw his smile, his sharp eyes, the way he commanded a room. She saw no trace of the man from her mother's stories. Then, last year during a broadcast, he dismissed a young contestant with a hearing aid. "If you can't hear the sizzle," he said with a cold laugh, "how can you possibly control the fire?" That was the moment her plan crystallized. It wasn't about reunion. It was about reckoning. She applied under her mother's maiden name. No one in the city knew she was deaf. She read lips flawlessly, and her staff used simple signs. But for the contest, she would not hide. She would cook as herself. She spent months perfecting a dish that was a direct challenge to him: silent harmony, a deconstructed peanut stew that used texture and temperature in place of sound. It was a masterpiece of her world. The day she returned to the village with her mother was charged with a quiet storm. Adana was terrified, but her pride was fiercer. They stood at the edge of the festival grounds, the noise a wall of sensation. Amina felt the drums in her chest, saw the colors swirl, and across the crowded square, she saw him for the first time in the flesh. Chef Kofi holding court, surrounded by sycophants. He didn't glance their way. He didn't feel the tectonic shift his past had just caused. The preliminary round was a blur of heat and focus. Amina worked in a cocoon of concentration, her interpreter at her side to relay time calls. She moved with a grace that caught the other judges' eyes. Her flavors were bold, her technique impeccable. She advanced easily to the finals. Chef Kofi had watched her station, his expression unreadable. He noted her signing. The way she communicated. He made no comment, but something had flickered in his eyes. Not recognition. Annoyance. The night before the final, Amina and her mother sat in a quiet room. Adana held her daughter's hands. "He will not be kind," she signed. Amina's reply was firm. "I did not come for kindness, I came for the truth. But here's the thing about truth. It's a two-edged knife, and the man holding the other end had no idea it was pointed at his throat." The final round. 3 contestants under the brutal midday sun. The crowd was a roaring ocean. Amina's station was directly in front of the judge's table. She prepared her silent harmony, her movements a precise, beautiful dance. When the time was called, she presented her plates. The other judges tasted, their faces breaking into smiles of astonishment. They passed the final plate to Chef Kofi, the head judge. He took a bite, chewed slowly, then he put his fork down with a definitive clink and reached for the microphone. He didn't comment on the complex spice balance or the perfect texture. He looked directly at Amina, at her hands, and his voice, amplified for all to hear, was cold and clear. Cooking is about taste, not charity. This theatrical presentation cannot disguise a fundamental lack of connection to the craft. If you cannot even hear your own ingredients, what are you really bringing to my table? The crowd fell silent. The cruelty was so precise, so public, it stole the air from the square. Amina stood frozen, the humiliation burning through her like poison, but in her eyes there was no shock, only a cold gathering fire, because the trap was now set and he had just stepped into it. The silence that followed was thicker than the humid air. Amina did not cry. She did not look away. She simply stared at Chef Kofi, her expression unreadable, and then she began to sign. Her interpreter, a young woman named Efwa, stepped forward, her own face pale with anger. She cleared her throat and translated for the stunned crowd. Chef Mensa says, "Cooking is about taste." I agree. The judges have tasted my dish. They know its value. He says it is about connection. Again, I agree. My connection is to the woman who taught me in a silent kitchen that food is a language everyone understands. You have judged my deafness, not my dish. That says more about you than it will ever say about me. A ripple went through the audience. Murmurs of support, of shock. The other two judges shifted uncomfortably. Kofi's smile had vanished, replaced by a tight, defensive mask. He hadn't expected a counterattack. He was used to contestants crumbling. This one stood taller. This is not about sentiment. He snapped into the microphone, trying to reclaim control. This is a technical competition. But here's the thing, Efwa continued, voicing Amina's swift, sharp signs. The technical score from the other judges for my silent harmony was the highest of the round. 92 points. Your score, Chef, was a 50. A disparity of 42 points. The rules state that a difference over 30 points requires a public explanation of the technical faults. Please explain them to us. List the technical failures in the searing, the seasoning, the texture, the balance. I am listening. Kofi froze. He had not calculated the scores. He had acted on pure, arrogant impulse. The festival organizer, an older woman named Nana Ya, hurried to the judges' table, her eyes wide. She scanned the scorecards. The math was correct. A rule long ignored had just been invoked. The crowd leaned in. The cameras, there to broadcast the festival, zoomed closer. He was trapped by his own rulebook. He stammered. He spoke of intangible elements and the spirit of the dish. His words were vague, flailing. The crowd's murmur grew into a wave of disapproval. For the first time in a decade, the king of fusion was losing his audience. He cut his explanation short, declared the competition must move on, and announced the winner, a talented but now forgotten young man from a neighboring town. The applause was polite, hollow. The real story had already been written. Backstage was chaos. Reporters swarmed not around the winner, but around Amina. They shouted questions she couldn't hear until Ifua pushed through. "Amina, how do you feel? Will you appeal the score?" Amina signed one sentence for the cameras. "I did not come to win. I came to be seen." Then she walked away, her mother waiting in the shadows, tears of rage and pride streaming down her face. That night, the village did not sleep. The incident was all anyone discussed. In the cramped media tent, journalists reviewed the footage. A savvy producer for a national news channel had a thought. The girl's poise, her familiar intensity, and the mother hovering protectively. He knew Chef Kofi's official biography. Born in this village, left for the city decades ago, no mention of family. He sent a researcher to dig into old village records. Meanwhile, in his lavish rented villa on the outskirts of the festival, Kofi Mensah was drinking. His two sycophantic assistants tried to reassure him. "It was a minor controversy, Chef. It will blow over." The girl was disrespectful, but Kofi wasn't listening. He was staring at a paused image on his laptop, taken from the broadcast. A close-up of Amina's face as she signed the set of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. It was a ghost from a life he had sealed away. A memory, unbidden and violent, flashed Adana. 20 years younger, standing in the doorway of a mud-brick house, her hands covered in flour, her eyes pleading as he packed his single bag. "What about us? What about the child? He had kissed her forehead, promised to send money, promised to return. He sent money for 6 months, then the addresses changed, his career took off, and the promises became too heavy to carry. He had convinced himself they were better off without him. He had buried the guilt under layers of accolades. His phone buzzed. It was Nana Yar, the organizer. "Coffee, we have a problem. The press is asking questions, not about the scores, about the girl, about her mother." His blood ran cold. "What are they asking?" he demanded. A long pause. "They are asking if you know the name, Adana Okoro." The past had just kicked down his door. Across the village, in a small guest house, Amina and Adana were having a very different conversation. Adana was packing, her hands trembling. "We should go now, before this gets worse. You have made your point. He is humiliated." Amina took her mother's hands, stilling them. "Mama, look at me." Humiliation was the first step. He felt a fraction of the shame you have carried for 20 years, but he does not yet know why he should feel it. That comes next. "But what if he denies it? What if he uses his power against us?" Adana whispered. Amina's smile was thin. "He already did on national television, and the whole country saw him attack a deaf girl for being deaf. His power is cracking. Now we show them. The crack goes all the way to his foundation." The next morning, the festival was supposed to be winding down. Instead, it was electric with scandal. The national news channel aired a special report. It showed the humiliation clip, followed by Amina's powerful response. Then the anchor's voice turned grave. "Our investigation has uncovered a deeper connection. Chef Kofi Mensah, who left this village 2 decades ago, has a past he has never publicly acknowledged. We have located the birth certificate of one Amina Okoro, born 24 years ago in this very district. Father's name, unknown. Mother's name, Adana Okoro. Adana Okoro was a known figure to older villagers as the young woman Chef Kofi was involved with before his departure. The report did not outright say it. It didn't have to. The implication hung in the air. A lit fuse. Social media exploded. Chef Kofi and Silent Harmony started trending. The story was no longer about a cooking competition. It was about abandonment, privilege, and a very public fall from grace. Kofi's publicist told him to stay inside, to issue no statement, but pride is a terrible advisor. He called Nana Yar and demanded a press conference. He would set the record straight. He would explain that this was a sad attempt at extortion by a woman from his past, that the girl was likely not his, that he was the victim of a coordinated smear. His team scrambled to write a statement full of legalistic denials. What he didn't know was that Amina had been waiting for this. She had given one exclusive interview to the same news channel the night before. It was set to air immediately after his press conference. He stood before the cameras at noon, under the same canopy where he had judged the contest. He looked tired, defiant. He read the statement, denying any parental responsibility and condemning the orchestrated character assassination. He took 3 questions. The last one cut through the noise. "Chef Kofi," a reporter asked, "if this is all a lie, why did you score Amina's dish so low? Was it really about the food, or was it about a face that reminded you of a past you're trying to forget?" He lost his composure. "You know nothing about my past," he shouted, pointing a finger. "That woman made her choices. I built myself from nothing." It was a catastrophic admission. The word "that woman" echoed with contempt. As the press conference dissolved into shouting, every screen in the media tent cut to Amina's pre-recorded interview. She sat calmly with her mother beside her. The interviewer held up a faded photograph. It showed a young Kofi, his arm around a beaming Adana, in front of the very same village festival grounds. On the back, a handwritten inscription, "For my Adana, my inspiration." Always Kofi, Adana, on camera, silently produced a bundle of letters, tied with string. The postmark spanned 2 years after he left. The last one read, "I'm sorry, the city is expensive, I will send more soon." Then nothing. Amina looked directly into the lens, her signing slow and precise, Ifua's voice translated. "He asked what I was bringing to his table. I brought the truth he left on our doorstep. I brought the ghost of the family he erased. My dish was called Silent Harmony. There is no harmony in our story, only his silence. And today, that ends." The feed cut back to the live press conference. Chef Kofi was staring at a monitor, his face ashen. He saw the photo, he saw the letters, he saw the two women, the one he betrayed, and the daughter he never knew, unveiling the evidence of his own forgotten promises. The fortress of his reputation shattered in real time. Reporters now shouted a new question, one he could not possibly answer. "Chef Kofi, do you have anything to say to your daughter?" He turned without a word, pushing through his security, fleeing the stage. The cameras followed his retreat, the image of a broken man running from a past that had finally and utterly caught up to him. But for Amina and Adana, this was not the end. It was the beginning of the most dangerous part, because a cornered animal, especially one with money and influence, does not simply surrender. It attacks. And Kofi Mensah had just lost everything except the will to fight back. Retreat, for a man like Kofi, was only a tactical repositioning. Behind the closed gates of his villa, the shock wore off, burned away by a white-hot fury. He wasn't facing a scandal, he was facing annihilation. His phone lit up with calls from sponsors, from the network that carried his show, from restaurant partners. One by one, they dropped him. The king of fusion was now toxic, and he knew exactly who to blame. His lawyers arrived within the hour. Not publicists, lawyers. Their strategy was not denial, but destruction. "We flipped the narrative," the lead attorney said, spreading documents on the table. "We paint Adana Okoro as a vindictive woman who raised her daughter to extort you. We claim the letters are forgeries, the photo inconclusive. We sue the news channel for defamation. We attack their credibility so fiercely that the public won't know what to believe." Kofi listened, his eyes cold. "And the girl, Amina?" The lawyer shrugged. "A pawn. Misguided. We offer a private, modest settlement with a strict non-disclosure agreement. If she refuses, we include her in the lawsuit." The pressure will break them. They have no money for a legal war. This was the new battlefield, not the court of public opinion, but an actual court where resources mattered more than truth. But here's where they miscalculated. They assumed Amina and Adana were alone. The interview had aired, and in the city, at the Spice Garden, Amina's entire kitchen staff had watched it. Her sous chef, a fiercely loyal man named Kwame, had seen his boss humiliated and then vindicated. He made calls. By that evening, a coalition was forming. The city's culinary community, long stifled by Kofi's elitist gatekeeping, saw an opening. Deaf advocacy groups, outraged by the on-air discrimination, mobilized. Offers of pro bono legal help began flooding the guest house. Amina's quiet act of defiance had become a rallying cry. 2 days after the press conference, a formal notice arrived for Adana. A cease and desist letter from Kofi's lawyers, demanding she retract all statements about paternity and implying legal action for extortion. It was meant to terrify. Instead, it ignited a deeper fire. Adana showed it to her daughter, her hands steady for the first time. "He is still trying to silence us," she signed. Amina read the legalese, then looked at her mother. "He doesn't know you kept everything." Adana went to an old metal trunk under her bed. From beneath folded fabrics, she pulled out a manila envelope, not just letters. Bank deposit slips from 23 years ago with Kofi's scribbled signature, for sums that were substantial then. The last one was dated 7 months after Amina's birth. Then a deed, a small plot of village land, left to Adana by her grandmother. And a notarized document, signed by a young Kofi Mensah, granting him exclusive culinary development rights to traditional recipes from Adana's family, recipes he had famously published as his own family heritage in his first cookbook. The compensation clause was blank. He had promised to fill it in later. He never did. This wasn't just abandonment, it was intellectual theft. The Kofi's grandmother's groundnut stew that launched his career, it was Adana's grandmother's. Amina stared at the document, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. His entire brand, his origin story, was built on a lie. He hadn't just left them, he had stolen from them to build his castle. They took this new evidence to their pro bono lawyer, a sharp young woman named Amma from a civil rights firm. Amma's eyes widened. "This changes everything," she said. "This moves us from a family drama to a case of fraud and breach of contract. The statute of limitations may be complex, but the court of public opinion has no limits. We released this, but they decided to wait, to let Kofi make the next move. They didn't have to wait long. Kofi, believing his legal blitz was working, went back on the offensive. He gave an interview to a friendly tabloid. He appeared remorseful but misled. He spoke of a brief, youthful relationship and regrettable accusations. He said he was heartbroken that his success had inspired such a targeted campaign. He even announced with great fanfare a new charitable initiative, the Kofi Mensa Culinary Scholarship for the Hearing Impaired. It was a masterpiece of cynical PR, an attempt to monetize and co-opt the very disability he had mocked. The article published, the backlash was instantaneous and more brutal than before. The deaf community called it disability washing. Food critics denounced the hypocrisy, and then the anchor from the national news channel went on air again. She held up a copy of the tabloid. Chef Mensa speaks of a targeted campaign. What he doesn't mention is the campaign he has launched. We have obtained the cease and desist letter sent to Adana Okoro, threatening her with lawsuits for telling her truth. We have also received new documentation which we have verified regarding the origins of his signature recipes. The broadcast that followed was a forensic dismantling. They showed the deed, the recipe agreement, the bank slips. They interviewed an elderly village historian who confirmed the recipes belonged to the Okoro family. They had a graphologist verify Kofi's signature. The narrative flipped entirely. He was no longer just a deadbeat dad. He was a cultural thief who built his empire on stolen legacy. Kofi watched the broadcast from his villa, his lawyers silent beside him. The ground was not just crumbling beneath him, it was opening up. His phone rang. It was the board of his restaurant group. They were invoking a morality clause. They were voting him out. His own empire was ejecting him. This was the it gets even bigger moment. The personal had exploded into the professional. His life's work was being legally and publicly dismantled. In a rage, he did the one thing his lawyers begged him not to do. He got in his car and drove to the guest house. It was late. The festival was over, the village quieter. He pounded on the door. Adana opened it, her face a mask of calm defiance. He pushed past her into the small sitting room where Amina stood. "You want to destroy me," he shouted, his composure gone. "You have succeeded. Are you happy? You've taken everything." Amina watched him, then signed slowly. Efwa, who was staying with them, voiced her words. "You took everything first. You took my mother's love, my childhood, her recipes, her dignity. We are just asking for the return of the truth." He stared at her signing hands, at Adana's resolute face, and something in him finally broke. Not into remorse, but into a desperate, pathetic bargaining. "What do you want? Money? A job? I can give you a position in a restaurant, a good one. We can settle this privately. This doesn't have to be the end." Amina's reply was a knife. "You still don't understand. This was never a negotiation. This was a judgment, and you have been found guilty by the only jury that matters. Your own conscience, and the world that now sees you for what you are." He had nothing left to say. The threats, the money, the power, none of it worked here. He turned and left, a hollow man. But as his car pulled away, a different car, parked in the shadows, also left. A paparazzo had caught the entire confrontation through the window. The footage, shaky but clear, was online within the hour. The public saw the mighty chef, reduced to a pleading, angry man in a small room, being silently judged by the women he wronged. The next morning, the final blow landed. The Okofe Festival Governing Board, under immense pressure, issued a statement. Chef Kofi Mensa was permanently banned from serving as a judge. The title of King of Fusion, a moniker they had trademarked for the event, was formally revoked. They announced that the following year's festival would feature a new category, traditional innovation, with recipes requiring proof of origin. It was a direct and very public rebuke. Kofi was finished, but in his ruin, he saw one last twisted path to salvation. If he could not be the hero, he would force the world to see him as a victim. He instructed his lawyers to file the lawsuit, not just against the news channel, against Adana and Amina for defamation, emotional distress, and interference with business relations. It was a nuclear option designed to drag them through years of costly, draining litigation. A war of attrition he was sure he could win. The papers were served at dawn as Amina held the thick legal document. The weight of his endless fight settled on her. She had wanted truth. He was responding with endless punishing conflict. She looked at her mother, at their lawyer Amma. The public victory was complete. But the private war, it seemed, was only beginning, and the final battle would not be fought in the media or the village square, but in a cold, silent courtroom where the truth would have one last chance to speak. The lawsuit was not a legal strategy, it was a weapon of exhaustion. Kofi Mensah's legal team filed motion after motion, each one designed to drain time, money and spirit. They hoped Amina and Adana would fold under the weight. They underestimated the weight those two women had already been carrying for a lifetime. Arma, their pro bono lawyer, transformed the case. She didn't just defend against the defamation claim, she countersued for fraud, for breach of contract on the recipe agreement, for emotional distress, and for the years of unpaid child support calculated to the last penny. The case was no longer Mensah versus Okoro, it became the people versus a legacy of lies. The discovery process was a surgical excavation of Kofi's life. Every financial record, every old contract, every email was subpoenaed. What they found was a pattern. The stolen recipes were just the beginning. His first restaurant's business plan was funded by an investor he had lied to, claiming the recipes were his grandmother's legacy. He had done the same to other young chefs, taking credit for their ideas. The public persona was a carefully constructed facade, built on other people's work and other people's silence. The trial date was set for 9 months later. In the interim, life diverged dramatically. Kofi, stripped of his endorsements and TV show, sold his villa and moved into a city apartment. He was a ghost in the culinary world, occasionally seen looking gaunt and bitter. His lawyers advised a settlement. He refused. His pride was now a prison. Amina and Adana returned to the city, but they did not return to their old lives. The public support had translated into tangible opportunity. A publishing house offered Amina a deal for a cookbook, Silent Harmony, Recipes from a World Heard by Hand. A major food network, the one that had dropped Kofi, approached her about hosting a short documentary series on adaptive cooking techniques. She accepted on one condition. Her mother would be a co-presenter, sharing the history behind the traditional dishes. Adana, who had spent decades hiding from the past, found her voice. She spoke at women's groups and culinary schools about ownership, legacy, and the quiet theft of cultural heritage. The community that had once whispered about her now celebrated her resilience. They were not just surviving the lawsuit, they were building a new future in its shadow. The trial began on a rainy Monday. The courtroom was packed. Kofi sat at the defendant's table, flanked by his expensive lawyers, looking isolated. Amina, Adana, and Amma sat opposite, a picture of quiet solidarity. The first day was procedural. The second day, Amma called her first witness, a forensic document examiner who verified every signature on the recipe agreement and the bank slips. Then she called the elderly village historian, who recounted the Okoro family's culinary history in vivid detail. But the real turning point came on the third day. Amma called Kofi Mensah to the stand. Under oath, his arrogance was stripped away, replaced by a defensive, evasive posture. Amma walked him through the timeline, document by document. His denials grew weaker, then she presented him with a photocopy of a page from his own best-selling cookbook next to Adana's handwritten recipe card. "Chef Mensah, is this your signature on this card, granting you rights to this recipe?" It looks like it. And did you ever compensate Adana Okoro as the agreement states you would?" "I intended to. It was a different time." "A different time? The agreement is dated. The child support payments stopped the same year this cookbook was published. Coincidence?" He had no answer. The jury watched, their faces hardening. Then Amma asked the final question. "When you saw Amina Okoro at the Oko festival, when you tasted her dish and saw her signing, did you feel anything? Any flicker of recognition? Any connection to the young woman you left pregnant in that village 24 years ago?" Kofi looked at Amina. For the first time, he held her gaze not as an adversary, but as a father seeing his grown child. The mask slipped completely. His voice broke. "I saw her mother's eyes." It was not an admission of legal guilt, but it was the truth. The courtroom was silent. He stepped down from the stand a broken man. His own lawyers seemed to shrink away from him. The trial didn't need to continue. The jury had seen everything they needed. The judge called for a recess. Before the jury could even deliberate, Kofi's lead lawyer approached Armour with an offer: drop all claims, both his and theirs, with no financial exchange, a clean walk away. It was a surrender. Amina and Adana conferred. They hadn't done this for money, they had done it for acknowledgement, for the public record, for the truth to be officially stated. They counter-offered. He would publicly acknowledge in a written statement that the recipes in his first cookbook were sourced from the Okoro family with insufficient credit. He would also pay a nominal token sum to a deaf culinary arts fund. In return, they would drop their financial claims. He agreed. The statement was released to the press. It was dry, legalistic, but it contained the essential admission. The headline wrote itself: "Disgraced chef admits to recipe theft from former lover." The war was over. But here is the surprising detail that no one expected. In the weeks that followed, Kofi Mensah did not disappear. He checked himself into a residential treatment facility for stress and exhaustion. While there, away from the cameras and the sycophants, he began therapy. He started writing letters, not legal threats, but real letters, to Adana, to Amina. He did not send them. His therapist advised him it was for his own processing, but the act of writing them forced him to confront, for the first time, the hollow man he had become. A year later, Amina's documentary series, Taste of Silence, won a national award. At the ceremony, a journalist asked her about Kofi. She signed her response thoughtfully. The system held him accountable. That was the point. What he does with that accountability is his journey now. Mine is here. She gestured to her mother in the audience, to her cookbook on a display table, to the signed copy of the award. Adana finally opened the small restaurant she had always dreamed of, a cozy place called Grandmother's Table, where she served the recipes that were almost lost. It had a 6-month waiting list. And Kofi, he left the city. He moved to a small town and, using a pseudonym, began working as a consultant for a small, struggling food co-op. He was quieter. The arrogance was gone. He was just a man trying to remember how to cook for the love of it, not for the applause. He never contacted Amina or Adana again. Some wounds are too deep for reconciliation, and some silences must be respected. The story that began with a public humiliation on a festival stage ended not with a dramatic courtroom victory speech, but with a quiet, irreversible shift. A stolen legacy was returned. A hidden truth was etched into the public record. A daughter who entered a contest to confront a ghost found not a father, but her own formidable strength. And a man who built an empire on lies was reduced to building a small, honest life from the rubble. The noise of the scandal faded, but the change it created was permanent. The Oko Festival instituted new ethical guidelines for judges. Deaf chefs found new platforms, and in kitchens everywhere a quiet lesson resonated. You can try to bury the past, but sometimes the past sends its best chef to serve you the truth on a plate you cannot refuse. In the end, this story was never just about a cooking competition. It was about the deafening power of a silence that was finally broken. For 24 years, Adana's silence was forced upon her, a burden of abandonment and stolen legacy. Amina transformed that silence into a different kind of language, one of exquisite flavor, unshakable truth, and undeniable justice. We watch stories like this and we see the drama, the public showdown, the satisfying fall of an arrogant man. But the real victory was quieter. It was a mother and daughter reclaiming their narrative from someone who had written them out of his. It was a proof that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always leaves a trail. And when someone is brave enough to follow that trail to its end, they don't just find answers, they find the power to rewrite the future. So now I want to ask you a question. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Think about the silences in your own world, the stories untold, the truths waiting at the edge of speech. What would it take to give them a voice? What would you risk to reclaim what is yours? If this story of courage, legacy, and quiet strength resonated with you, then don't let it end here. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to see that justice can be served even on a cold plate. And most importantly, subscribe and stay with us. because stories like this remind us that the most powerful ingredients in any life are truth, memory, and the courage to use them.